This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for August 20th, 2019, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, checkers.
But we also have a special guest, Stuart Robbins.
Hey, space junkies.
We have a great show for you today. Stuart is going to talk to us about retrograde in the solar system. And then Pat has another game of Name That. But first, Adam, talk to us about our mailbag.
Here at TRC, we love getting mail from our listeners. We can't read it all on the show, but we always love reading it, be it feedback, praise, criticism, or a segment suggestion. There are tons of ways to get in touch with us. We have our email address, info@trcpodcast.com. This can be accessed through the contact form on our website. You can also leave a comment on individual posts on our blog at trcpodcast.com. We also have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages where you can contact us by sliding into the DMs, as the kids like to call it, or just commenting on the post. Now, I wanted to highlight a couple of pieces of feedback we got over the past couple of weeks. The first is a comment on the blog by Rich. Now, Rich has been in touch with us a number of times, and you can find his comments on a lot of the posts on our site. This one was on episode 558 and touched on all the segments we covered. And I quote, "I know that broaching any controversy involving famous people is difficult, especially with Neil deGrasse Tyson having everything from actual haters to full-blown sycophants. So kudos to you folks for addressing the issue while knowing that everyone along that spectrum will yell at you for being wrong at one point or another. In truth, you can't really be wrong about your own opinion, so as always, the Reality Check crew members are absolutely right, no matter what." That's a nice way of looking at it. I feel like it's fair to say that he tries to be provocative or even edgy in an attempt to get people thinking more widely about things. And unfortunately, he sometimes crosses the line into belligerence. So as someone who often can logically believe one thing while still completely feeling the exact opposite, I do understand why some people have a hard time applying the principle of charity and are wondering if his apology was actually a sarcastic dig at the overly emotional reactions over sensationalism he was critiquing in the first place. So I don't believe he was trying to be malicious or hurtful, yet his original comment does smack of someone trying to prove how much smarter they are than everyone else, which is, sadly, a common affliction in any intellectual field. So as many have pointed out, when emotions are running high, he should probably simply run these things by a few friends first, and while he probably has many offers for that already, it's an absolutely indisputable fact that you folks would be his best choice.
Aww.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? As for statues, I agree that some of them look really tacky with full color. Also, I do find something special about taking in the pure forms of the uncolored pieces that we otherwise may not appreciate. The interactive virtual reality museums of the future will no doubt let us explore all options. Wouldn't that be cool? Just like hippos, I don't float either, so I have to actively propel myself to stay afloat at all times, except in the Dead Sea. A quick search for baby hippo swimming pretty much tells the story. The little ones can propel themselves level or up for short periods, yet this is not at all surprising that the adults can't or just don't. I mean, if you're always in shallow water and can hold your breath for long periods, why put in so much effort? Thanks again for another great episode. Well, thank you, Rich, for this and other nice feedback that you've given us.
I love your email feedback, Rich. Keep it coming.
Very kind.
Next, we got a Facebook comment by Ken, who was the listener who originally brought up concerns about hippos swimming. I quote again, "The hippo segment was fantastic and gets to the heart of why TRC is a great show. Starting from a simple statement of supposed fact, hippos can't swim, you break it down by what do people who know about this say, which when they inevitably disagree leads to what does it mean to swim anyway. Where we end up is taking a hard look at our assumptions, questioning everything, and learning a bunch of stuff about hippos, and basically having a sort of vague answer-ish. I've learned over the years to feel better about thinking hard over something and not having an answer, as opposed to feeling confident in an unexamined assumption. Pat did a great job on this, and the Russell quote, as well as the fact that it may not be a Russell quote, was the icing on the epistemological cake. Well done."
Yes, I like all those words.
Well, thank you, Ken, and we appreciate the original discussion on hippos swimming, which led to the segment as well. So to everyone who's written in and commented, we enjoy hearing from you, and keep it up.
He gets to the core of Pat's always saying, it's okay to say, I don't know. That's a perfectly acceptable answer to a question.
Except during a dissertation defense. Just kidding, Rachel.
Thanks, Adam. And now, to give you a bit of context, Cristina did a segment on episode 557 about Mercury retrograde, or even Mercury in retrograde, as some people say. She mentioned that all the planets in our solar system exhibit apparent retrograde motion. This resulted in a long conversation amongst the panel that was cut out of the show, but we all kind of thought, we should probably talk to Stuart about this. So, Stuart, thanks for coming on and agreeing to talk to us about this. What is retrograde, and how does it play out in the solar system, and why does Mercury get all the headlines?
All right, so I'm going to try to answer this in 5 minutes or less. All right.
Wrong podcast.
Yeah. Well, good, because this is going to take a while. So over the course of a night, stars move from east to west in our sky. That's how most stuff moves, at least as long as you're well above the atmosphere. It looks like it is moving from east to west. And yes, I'm going to be talking about Earth-centric viewing for this entire segment. So it's normal for planets to slowly move over the course of many, many, many nights from west to east relative to those stars. These are going with the direction of the sun, and we call that prograde or direct motion because they are going with the sun. So the sun, over the course of many, 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 many nights, is going to appear to rise slightly west of the previous sunrise. That's why it's called direct or prograde motion, because it's going with the sun. Retrograde is when an object appears to move in the opposite direction, or against the sun, from east to west over the course of many, many, many nights. With that said, this is actually different from what Cristina mentioned in episode 557. I re-listened to that episode, and Cristina, you said the opposite of what I had written down, and so I tried to actually go back and research this just to make sure that I got the direction right, because all I could remember from when I taught this about 9 years ago was that it was not what was intuitive. It's really hard to find this information. So I actually went back to my lecture notes from Astronomy 1110 when I taught this in summer of 2010, and yes, my directions are correct. Yours are incorrect. The article that you got it from, I think, is the MNN article. It came from there, and it was just incorrect. And like a lot of astrology stuff, when you try to research the actual astronomy, a lot of the information that you find online is incorrect. It's not just incorrect on astrology sites, it's also incorrect on some Q&A forums. So like I found something on a Quora post, and it was actually written by a NASA Solar System ambassador, and they gave completely incorrect information about motions in the sky.
Stuart's trying to make me feel better about the fact that I...
Right. So my point in belaboring that is 2 points. One is to make you feel a little bit better about getting it wrong, but also to emphasize that if you have this sort of question or astronomy come up, phone a friend.
Don't go on the internet. Call Stuart. Yeah.
Maybe have the conversation about having Stuart on before the segment, not
right.
after.
1-800-AstroStu. So yeah, that's how it goes. Basically, prograde is movement with the sun. Retrograde is movement against the sun over the course of many, many nights. So what is Mercury in retrograde? It's when Mercury does that thing. What are other planets in retrograde? It's when other planets do that thing. So that is retrograde in a nutshell. The next question that I can address is, why do we have retrograde motion? And this is something that took a few thousand years to figure out. And we really had to go from Earth-centered to not Earth-centered. We had to go to a sun-centered or heliocentric model of the solar system to understand this. And it's really, really hard to come up with an analogy because it involves two things moving in different directions at different speeds and watching one of them move from the other's vantage point against something in the background. Right. So I try. Yeah. So, people will come up with like racetrack scenarios and other things, and those don't work for me. So the best analogy that I can come up with is picture one of those carnival games where you have things moving along a track and you have to like knock it down or shoot it with a dart or something. I don't know, we have violent ones in America. Or maybe like a balloon or something, and you win a prize. So picture one of those carnival games. I assume that even if people haven't been to a carnival, they are familiar with that kind of thing. So now picture instead of one track, you have two tracks. And instead of the two tracks moving at the same rate, one of them is moving faster than the other, and they both change direction at random times. So now, with your two moving random tracks, picture yourself sitting on one object in the track that is closest to you, and that's going to be our observation point, or Earth. Then picture one object on the track behind it, and picture a big long wooden stake. And you're holding that stake from your observation point on one of those tracks, and you shove that stake through one of the objects on the track behind it. As the two tracks move at different rates in different directions, the angle that you're holding that stake at is going to shift because the tracks are moving differently relative to each other.
Now I'm still holding the stake, or do I let go of the stake?
Yeah, you're still holding the stake.
Okay.
Because that is your line of observation. You are going to observe along that wooden stake. Now, get a magic extension and extend that stake out to the back of the carnival game. So now, as the two tracks move back and forth, that stake is going to trace out a back and forth motion along the back of the carnival game. That direction of motion is going to be completely dependent on the two tracks' relative motion to each other. So, for example, if both tracks are moving to the left, then the stake is going to move to the left. If the track that you're on is moving to the left, and the track behind it is moving to the right, then that stake is going to move really, really quickly to the right, because the relative motion is a very fast shearing motion. And then vice versa. So if your track is moving to the right, and the other track is moving to the right, the stake is going to move to the right. If your track is moving to the right, and the one behind it is moving to the left, the stake is going to move to the left. Are you guys with me so far?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that back and forth motion that the stake has traced on the back of the carnival game is the back and forth motion that a planet traces on our sky as observed from Earth. So that's prograde and retrograde motion. It's just a shifting of direction of one object relative to the other when viewed from one against the background of the fixed stars. So hopefully that's as clear as mud.
Well, so Stuart, if we have any two objects in orbit around a larger object, from one vantage point, we'll always see retrograde?
So if the two objects are always moving at the exact same angular rate, then the object that you are observing will always appear to move in a prograde motion. But because the planets move at different speeds, and because they're at different distances from the sun, so you have not only different speeds, but also different periods around the sun, you get a buildup of all of these different motions acting together to give you prograde and retrograde motion. So Mercury will sweep out effectively it goes around the sun 360 degrees in about, if I'm going from memory, I think it's 88 days, as opposed to Earth, farther from the sun, about 3 times farther from the sun, takes 365.24-ish days to go around the sun. So right there, that's a different angular rate. That being the basic idea, and hopefully maybe slightly clearer to you, a little bit more about when things appear to go in retrograde versus not. So inferior planets, those are the ones closer to the sun than Earth, are Mercury and Venus. And they tend to go into retrograde more often than superior planets, which are ones farther away from the sun than Earth. Mercury goes into retrograde about 3 to 4 times a year, as you said on your segment, Cristina. And Venus tends to go into retrograde about every 19 months. Superior planets are less frequently in retrograde and tend to follow an inverse function of how close they are to Earth. So what does that mean? Because that's also clear as pitch. So, by way of example, Mars takes about 26 months between retrograde cycles. So that's actually the longest that any of the planets take. Jupiter goes into retrograde about every 13 months, and Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune almost about every 12 months. So that's what I mean by it follows an inverse function of how close they are to the Earth. So if you're really close to the Earth like Mars, it's going to take a long time for you to go into retrograde if you are a superior planet. If you're really far from Earth, like Neptune, then it's going to be about every 12 months. Now, the reason why the ones that are farthest away tend to be about 12 months between cycles is because their retrograde and prograde motion is more dictated by Earth's orbit around the sun than their own motion around the sun. So from one year to the next, Neptune moves hardly at all in our sky because its period is much, much longer than Earth's around the sun.
Now, the one thing I'm wondering is, all these numbers considered, why is such a big deal in the astrology world, which is made up in a nonsense, made about Mercury being in retrograde when it happens with these other planets less frequently? So you might hear about Mars being in retrograde less often, but because it happens less frequently, you would think when it happens, people would be like, well, Mars is in retrograde. You know, that's a big deal because it only happens every 20-some months, right?
Thanks for the question, Adam. So actually, this was left on the cutting room floor, which fortunately I got a hold of that tape, so I was able to prepare for this. Why do we hear about Mercury in retrograde so often? I think it's because it just happens so much more frequently since it orbits the sun fastest. And so we go into Mercury retrograde a lot more often than any other of the planets, 3 to 4 times a year. It's about every 3.8 months. So that means that it's more in the public consciousness. So for example, because astrology is really a correlational pseudoscience, you have something happen more often, and so you can correlate it, or you can claim there's a correlation to events that are more in people's memory. So we're heading into election season in Canada. It seems like we're always in election season in the US. And so we always have this issue of the electorate has such a short-term memory. Something that happened 2 weeks ago before the election isn't necessarily going to sway something that happened the day before the election, for example. So those last ad buys are maybe kind of pointless. Maybe that's a future TRC segment. But with that in mind, I think that that's really why we hear about Mercury in retrograde so often. So how often does a piece of electronic equipment fail? Not once every 26 months, as you might think, but, with all the devices we have around the house, more like once every couple months. And so we can easily blame Mercury in retrograde. I think it's just like the lunacy claim in the full moon. With the full moon, though, you have it every month as opposed to every 3.8 months.
I also mentioned when I did the segment that historically, in the mid-18th century and almanacs from the late 19th century just perpetuated the association specifically between Mercury retrograde and bad weather. So maybe that's another reason why Mercury was the one that kind of stuck with us.
Right. So how often do you get a change in seasons? About every 3.8-ish months. And so bad weather coming in. It's again just because astrology is that correlational science. So every 26 months, well, it's harder to really pinpoint something that you can tie to a 26-ish month cycle. I mean, you can't even do it to midterm elections in the US because that's every 24 months. But then with astrology, you could say, well, maybe it's when Mars is in retrograde plus Mercury is also in retrograde and Saturn is in the 4th house. And so you can play all of these different games and try to come up with something that makes sense to people who are willing to part with their money.
As long as your data set and variables are numerous enough, you can make many things become many things.
Oh, exactly. Speaking about being numerous enough, there's also the question of how long does retrograde actually last? Because this is another thing that I found when I was searching this, and I felt really dirty. I felt like I had to wipe my internet browsing history after looking at all of these astrology sites. The duration of retrograde varies, again, by how close the object is to Earth and whether it's a superior or inferior planet. So the ones that are farthest out, they go to prograde about 6 months out of the year, and they go to retrograde about 6 months out of the year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, imagine that.
So maybe that doesn't really work well with astrology.
Right.
It's like, it's retrograde as often as like spring and summer.
Right. So that's in marked contrast with Mercury, which only spends 3 weeks in retrograde motion. And the other thing about this is that astrologers will do stuff like say, okay, so it's in retrograde motion, but the few weeks surrounding it, you can still feel the effects of that. And so, I mean, it's like, well, bad things happen to me, and it always seems like they happen within 2 weeks of a full moon.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Stuart. Informative as always. And now we turn to Pat for another game of Name That.
All right, here we go with another edition of everyone's favorite mostly guessing game, Name That. Since last month marked the 50th anniversary of the first humans landing on the moon, today we play Name That, the Apollo 11 edition.
I studied up on 12 and 13.
So as I dug into trivia on the moon landing, I honestly found it hard to keep it to 6 questions for this game. We also have a tiebreaker if required. As usual, I'll give you a piece of information and then ask you to name that from the choices provided. I've randomly chosen the order and we'll rotate.
Good thing I did that segment about the lost NASA lunar tapes recently.
Maybe that'll help you. Question number 1. Darren, you're up first. Name that. What was the total random access memory, or RAM, of the landing computer on the lunar module in which Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon? A, 4 kilobytes, B, 400 kilobytes, C, 1 megabyte, or D, 4 megabytes?
B, please.
Darren says 400 kilobytes. Next is Stuart.
Well, I was going to guess 512 something, and seeing that that was not an option, I have no idea. I'm going to go with A.
Stuart says 4 kilobytes. Next is Cristina.
I'm going to go with A. It's 1969.
Cristina agrees with Stuart. And lastly, Adam.
I thought it was 32K, but I may be misremembering the Bill Gates quote. And that would have been after 1969. Therefore, 32K would be more than 4K, so I think it's definitely 4K.
Adam also agrees with A. Eagle's landing computer had a total of 74 kilobytes of memory hardwired into its circuitry and only 4 kilobytes of erasable memory, used to store variable calculations. 1.8 kilometers above the moon's surface, the system was overloaded by an unexpected flow of data, causing an alarm to go off, which is called the 1202 error, almost causing the landing to be aborted. Question number 2. Many spacecraft set their sights on the moon before Apollo 11 mission. Which was the first spacecraft to land on the moon? Stuart, name that. A, Luna 2, B, Luna 9, C, Apollo 8, or D, Surveyor 1?
For reasons that I won't state, I'm going to guess Surveyor 1, and if I'm wrong, I think I know what the correct answer is.
Cristina?
I'm going to go with Luna 9. B. Is that B?
That's B. Cristina says B, Luna 9. Next is Adam.
I thought it was Russian. And aside from the Apollo being NASA, I don't know what that would mean. So I'm going to go with Luna 2.
Adam says A, Luna 2. And lastly, Darren.
I'm gamifying. I'll pick whatever Stuart said.
Stuart said D, Surveyor 1. And Darren agrees. The Russian spacecraft Luna 2 was the first to land on the moon, although it was a crash landing. It impacted the moon on September 14th, 1959. Almost 7 years later, on February 3rd, 1966, Luna 9 became the first spacecraft to achieve a soft lunar landing. It was also the first spacecraft to transmit photographs from the surface of the moon. The U.S. spacecraft Surveyor 1 landed on the moon 4 months later, showing how close the space race had become in the mid-1960s.
2 landed, but it was a crash landing, so technically I'm right.
The first landing was Luna 2. Crash landing, it's the first landing, and Adam is correct. Question number 3. You probably all know the name of the Apollo 11 lunar module, as in, the Eagle has landed. But what was the name of the mission's command module, which stayed in orbit during the landing? Cristina, name that. A, Athena, B, Hawk, C, Columbia, or D, Nydia?
I know I've heard this and read this. I'm going to go with A, Athena.
Cristina says A, Athena. Next is Adam.
I don't know this fact, but Athena just seems to work with the whole Apollo naming convention, though obviously Eagle doesn't fit with it, but I'm going to go with A as well, Athena.
All right, Adam agrees with A. Next is Darren.
Yeah, and I'll share some ramblings too before Stuart contradicts me. The fourth one seems just too difficult to pronounce in general. The Hawk goes with the Eagle, but it doesn't seem to fit as well, and Athena makes more sense to me, so I'm also picking Athena.
All right, Darren also picks Athena, and lastly, Stuart.
Columbia.
He sounded
Stuart
so
says
sure.
C, Columbia. While astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon in Eagle, Michael Collins remained alone in the command module Columbia. Columbia was the only part of the spacecraft to return to Earth.
So they went back up in the lander, but then ejected it?
They connected to Columbia, and then they let Eagle go before they came back
They
down.
just set that eagle to soar.
And that eagle crashed back on the moon or drifted off into space?
Well, you know what? There were a lot of really interesting facts that I could have had questions around. One of them is they don't actually know what happened.
Oh, that's the making of a great science fiction story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The eagle never landed.
Oh, wow.
Question number 4. Which one of these historical artifacts were taken aboard Apollo 11's lunar module? Adam, name that. A, parts from Galileo's first telescope. B, parts from the Wright brothers' Kitty Hawk airplane. C, a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Or D, parts from Gutenberg's original printing press.
I'm going to blame Nixon for it being the Declaration of Independence.
Adam says C, the Declaration of Independence. Next is Darren.
I'll say Declaration also.
Darren agrees. And next is Stuart.
I have no idea, so I'm going to guess randomly and say that probably, maybe, possibly B.
All right. Stuart says B. And lastly, Cristina.
I'm going to go with B.
So Cristina agrees with Stuart. Neil Armstrong took pieces of fabric and wood from the left wing of the Wright brothers' 1903 Kitty Hawk to the moon aboard the lunar module on the first moon landing. Question number 5. What went wrong when Aldrin first exited the space capsule? Darren, name that. A, one of his boots got caught up on the ladder. B, his spacesuit's internal urine collection system broke. C, his earpiece went out and he temporarily lost communication with mission control. Or D, he twisted his ankle landing on the surface of the moon.
Earpiece, please.
All right, Darren's going to go with C, his earpiece. Next is Stuart.
I also have no idea on this one, so I am going to guess A, because that sort of seems most likely to me.
Stuart says A, his boot got caught up on the ladder. Next is Cristina.
Producer Pat, can you read me B again?
His spacesuit's internal urine collection system broke.
That sounds like something that would happen to Buzz Aldrin. I'm going to go with B.
And lastly, Adam.
I'm not really sure. I feel like the sprained ankle seems to not make much sense in 1/6 gravity, or maybe it makes more because there's momentum and not the expectation of gravity. I don't know. But I'm going to go with the boot getting caught because I don't think it happened during the step. It's too momentous, you know.
All right. Adam also agrees with his boot getting caught. Aldrin landed so hard when he jumped from the capsule that it broke a tube in his urine collection system, which when he relieved himself, his boots filled with pee. He opted not to relay that information back to mission control.
Oh,
Wow.
So going to the last question, I have Darren with 0.
Nailed it.
Stuart with 3, Cristina with 3, and Adam with 2.
I'm tied with the planetary scientist.
I wondered if Stuart would have any advantage on this, and I really didn't think he would.
The moon's not a planet.
I don't do this stuff.
So last question, question number 6. Stuart, name that. What was the mission control's response to "The Eagle has landed"? A, okay, Neil, we see you coming down the ladder now. B, congratulations, gentlemen, you just made history. C, you got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. Or D, that's good news, Eagle. We're standing by for your burn report.
I can imagine any of them, actually. I have a harder time with C. Of course, so that means it'll probably be the correct answer. I'm going to go for B, because I would hope that the burn report was done during checkout before they actually went on the surface.
All right. Stuart says, congratulations, gentlemen. You just made history. Next is Cristina.
We're turning blue. Or we were turning blue. Whatever. C.
Christina's going with C. People were turning blue. Next, Adam.
I'm going to go with D, because I think maybe they did the burn report, but they hadn't turned it in, you know? That's how they are, burn reports.
All right. Adam goes with the burn report. And lastly, Darren.
Sorry, but what was A again?
Okay, Neil, we see you coming down the ladder.
Oh, why not? I'm already at 0.
So the answer is C. You got a bunch of us about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. Well done, Cristina.
I'd like to thank 5 Minutes with an Astronomer for...
Thanks, Pat. And thanks for joining us once again, listeners. We had a nice little mailbag segment. We always appreciate your feedback and comments. Mm-hmm. We appreciate Stuart stopping by once again to explain and explore Mercury in retrograde, which in general is about how things relative to other things are moving with reference to something. And we had the most difficult game of Name That ever, which would only be victorious to Cristina. Congratulations.
Good job.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us once again, Stuart.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
Remember, kids, science doesn't suck. It blows.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
I'd forgotten Stuart's outro.
It still gets me every time.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Reality Check, the weekly Canadian.
Hi, everybody.
It's his funny voice.
You shut your face, producer. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of Oh, wow. It's been a while.
Yeah, like a week.
Another 560.
No, it's been a while since I've screwed up the intro is what I meant, Cristina. Not a while since I've done it.
Word.
This still doesn't explain why I can't find my keys when Mercury's in retrograde, but that's okay.
Try putting them in the same spot every day. For reasons that I won't state, I'm going to say surveyor wrong and surveyor wrong. Okay, you got your outtake.
All right, Freud.
Wow.